Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So imagine standing in a room armed with flawless data, impeccable logic, and just a watertight argument, only to realize the person across the table doesn't care about any of it.
Oh, yeah. That's a rough realization.
Right. Like, they've already decided how the interaction ends, and your logic is just background noise. We're taught from a very young age that the best argument wins, but what happens when you bring an argument to, a predator?
You lose, and usually pretty badly.
Exactly. So today we are going on a deep dive into a highly curated collection of texts, specifically numbers 101 through 150 from the classical index of Aesop's Fables.
And we really need to clarify something right up front about these texts.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
Because I think people hear Aesop's Fables and they immediately think of, bedtime stories.
Right. They picture brightly lit kindergarten classrooms and talking animals teaching kids to share. But if you really want to understand the utility of these texts, you have to completely discard that modern association.
So what's the actual context we should be picturing for this deep dive?
The proper visual context is more like an old, dusty, dimly lit library of antiquity in the ancient Mediterranean world. I mean, the authors of these fables were engaged in a massive, sophisticated project of synthesis.
Synthesis of what, exactly? Like human behavior?
Exactly. They observed incredibly complex, messy, and often dangerous human problems. We're talking political corruption, the constant threat of violence, the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition.
So not exactly nursery rhyme material.
Not at all. And they distilled those sprawling issues down to their absolute bare metal. They mapped these human dynamics onto stark, undeniable interactions between animals, gods, and everyday people.
Which is why the animals are there, right? They're basically just avatars.
Yes. Their avatars used to bypass our psychological defenses so we can actually look at our own nature objectively.
That framing is just crucial for you, the listener, to keep in mind. Because, we currently live in a state of chronic information overload.
Oh, completely. We're drowning in it.
Right. We are bombarded with endless feeds of data, productivity hacks, 10-step programs, yet we still find ourselves repeating the exact same exhausting patterns in our careers, our relationships, our family dynamics.
Because the 10-step programs don't address the root behavior.
Exactly. What we are actually searching for are those underlying behavioral patterns. We need diagnostic tools that explain why people do what they do so we can finally find a shortcut to navigating our own lives.
Well, let's test that diagnostic tool right now. Let's look at Fable 110, The Lion and the Wild Ass.
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's unpack this one because it's brutal. So the narrative is pretty straightforward, right? A lion and a wild ass go out hunting together as partners.
Right, they form a joint venture, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The ass uses his speed to run down the prey, and the lion uses his strength to kill it. They operate as a team. But then it comes time to split the spoils.
And this is where the dynamic shifts completely.
Yeah, the lion divides the catch into 3 equal portions. He claims the first portion because he's the king of the beasts. He claims the second portion because he was an equal partner in the hunt.
And the third.
For the third portion, he tells the ass that unless he runs away immediately, that third portion is going to be a source of great pain. He just takes it all under the threat of violence.
It's such a stark image.
I mean, I look at that and I just struggle to understand why the ass ever agreed to the partnership in the first place. Did he actually believe the lion was going to honor a 50-50 split just because they shook hands on it?
Well, that confusion you're feeling is exactly the point the fable is designed to provoke. The wild ass is operating under the illusion of the contract.
The illusion of the contract. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, he believes that because they both contributed to the labor, they're operating within a shared framework of fairness. But the lion understands a fundamental reality that the ass is entirely blind to.
Which is what?
That when a profound power imbalance exists, agreements are only as strong as the more powerful party's willingness to honor them.
Wow. Yeah, that completely shifts the perspective.
And the mechanics of the lion's behavior are what we really need to focus on here. Notice that the lion doesn't just devour the food in a wild frenzy. He divides it first.
Right. He makes a whole show of categorizing it.
Exactly. He creates a pseudo-logical, almost bureaucratic justification for the theft. He categorizes his dominance to make it sound official.
He builds a rhetorical structure around the robbery. It feels incredibly similar to the dynamic of a toxic corporate merger, where one massive company absorbs a smaller one.
Oh, absolutely. Or even just a terribly one-sided group project.
Yes, you have the biggest player who suddenly invents this complex matrix of arbitrary reasons to take all the credit and all the equity.
They dress up the power grab in the language of fairness.
It makes me push back on this whole idea of fairness that we're taught. I mean, how are we supposed to process this harsh worldview? Because Fable 119 takes this idea of logic being used as a weapon to an even darker extreme.
You're talking about the cat and the cock.
Yeah. A cat pounces on a rooster and decides to eat him. But for some reason, the cat feels the need to provide an excuse first.
Right. The cat needs to justify the kill.
So she tells the rooster, "You're a nuisance. You crow at night and keep people awake, so I have to kill you." And the rooster, remarkably calm given the situation, provides a flawless logical defense.
He argues his economic value.
Exactly. He explains that he crows to wake men up so they can get to the fields. He's a vital part of the economic engine. Objectively, the rooster completely wins the debate.
But winning the debate doesn't save him.
No. The cat's response is chilling. She says, "That may be, but whether they can do without you or not, I'm not going without my dinner."
Yeah.
And she just eats him.
What's fascinating here is a specific line the text explicitly notes. The want of a good excuse never kept a villain from crime.
But what I'm really trying to wrap my head around is the psychology of the rooster here. I mean, why does he even bother debating the cat in the first place?
He debates because he is trapped in the just world hypothesis. Human beings, and by extension the rooster in this avatar, we crave order.
We want things to make sense.
Exactly. Our brains are wired to seek cause and effect relationships because understanding cause and effect is literally how we survive as a species.
So if the cat says, "I'm eating you because you wake people up," the rooster's brain just latches onto the word "because."
Right. The assumption is that if you can dismantle the premise, you can dismantle the threat. But power doesn't actually need logic.
It just uses logic as a costume.
Precisely. The cat puts on the clothing of a rational debate to distract the rooster, to keep him engaged and within striking distance. Bad actors will always reverse engineer a justification for a conclusion they've already reached.
So the cat had decided to eat the rooster the second she saw him. The whole debate was just theater to facilitate the consumption.
So it's theater, yes.
I want to pause and really consider the implications of that for a second, because it completely contradicts how we are taught to resolve conflict today.
Oh, it goes against everything we learn in school.
Right. We're told that if you bring spreadsheets, text message receipts, and flawless factual evidence to a disagreement, the other party will concede. But if we apply this cat and cock mechanism to modern relationships, this is the exact anatomy of gaslighting.
It's the exact blueprint. Think about an emotionally abusive dynamic.
Okay.
The manipulative partner will claim they are acting a certain way because of a specific action the victim took. The victim then exhausts themselves gathering evidence to prove they didn't take that action or that it was totally misunderstood.
And they win the debate. They prove their innocence.
Right, they win the debate. And the manipulator seamlessly pivots to a completely different justification, or they just attack anyway, because the logic was never the point.
The control was the point. Wow.
To fully grasp why the authors of the Fables emphasize this so heavily, we have to look at their historical environment.
All right, the ancient world wasn't exactly democratic.
No, they lived under absolute monarchs, tyrannical emperors, and really harsh, unyielding hierarchies. The line between apex predators and prey wasn't a metaphor for them. It was a daily reality.
So in that world, your survival depended entirely on recognizing who held the real power, not who had the best argument.
Exactly. Debating a tyrant was just a very efficient way to get executed.
But translating this to the 21st century, I mean, the apex predators today might not carry swords, but the dynamics haven't disappeared, right? They've just moved into boardrooms, family courts, our daily interaction.
Yeah, and engaging in a rational debate with a bad faith actor in those environments is actively dangerous. It tricks you into believing you have agency in a situation where you are actually just prey.
And there's a massive collateral cost to engaging in those unwinnable battles, which we actually see perfectly illustrated in Fable 107, the lion, the bear, and the fox.
Ah, yes. The war of attrition.
Exactly. So lion and a bear are fighting over a kid goat they both caught. They're both absolute powerhouses, apex predators, and they battle each other until they're just completely exhausted, bleeding, gasping on the ground.
They fight to a standstill.
Right. And meanwhile, a fox, who has just been sitting on the sidelines watching this entire spectacle, quietly walks up, takes the prize, and walks away.
And the lion and the bear can't do anything about it.
They're too weak to lift a paw to stop him.
It is the ultimate illustration of the economics of attrition. The lion and the bear become so consumed by their own ego and their need to establish dominance over each other that they completely lose sight of the objective.
They deplete the very resources they needed to actually enjoy the victory.
Right. When you engage in a war of ego, you burn energy, time, and capital that you can't get back.
You see this constantly in high-stakes litigation today. Like two massive companies or two angry individuals in a really bitter divorce will fight so viciously over the division of assets.
And who wins?
The lawyers. The only people who walk away with any wealth are the lawyers. They play the role of the fox, quietly collecting hourly fees, while the titans just bleed each other dry over pride.
It's a perfect modern translation.
So observing this, the challenge for you, the listener, is to figure out how to stop looking at conflict through the lens of fairness.
Because we desperately want to believe the world is inherently fair and that a good argument will always win. It's an obstacle to growth to realize it isn't.
It is a huge obstacle. But you have to start looking at conflict through the lens of situational awareness instead. Ask yourself, where in your life are you bringing a well-researched argument to someone who operates purely on power?
Where are you fighting a bear just to prove you're a lion while a fox steals your time?
Exactly. The moment you recognize you're dealing with a cat who has already decided on dinner, the goal is no longer to win the debate. The goal is to just get out from under the paws.
Which naturally forces us to shift our perspective inward, I think.
Us.
Well, if we acknowledge that external power dynamics, the lions and the cats of the world, are incredibly difficult, if not impossible to change, we have to question our own capacity for change.
Right. If we can't change them, can we change ourselves to better navigate this?
Exactly. And the Fables offer a perspective on human transformation that is highly controversial, especially when viewed through our modern lens.
Controversial is putting it mildly. Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at Fable 150, Venus and the Cat.
This is a wild one.
It really is. So a cat falls deeply in love with a handsome young man and actually begs the goddess Venus to turn her into a human woman. Venus agrees, and the transformation is complete.
She gets exactly what she wants.
She does. The cat is now a beautiful woman, the man falls in love with her, and they get married. But Venus decides to test whether the transformation was merely physical or if the core nature actually shifted.
So she introduces a trigger.
Right. She lets a mouse loose in the bridal chamber. Instantly, the woman forgets her new identity, leaps out of bed, and tries to hunt the mouse. Venus is disgusted by the failure of the experiment and turns her right back into a cat.
The external variables were entirely rewritten, but the core remained untouched.
She had the dress, the societal status, the human form. But the hardwired behavioral drive didn't budge an inch.
The mechanics of that failure are just profound. The fable is illustrating the absolute dominance of instinct over cosmetic adjustment.
We see a similar, though much darker exploration of this in Fable 108 too, right? The Blackamoor.
Yes, that one is very difficult to read, but it makes the same point about core nature. A man purchases an Ethiopian slave and, due to his own ignorance, assumes the man's dark skin is simply dirt from a previous owner's neglect.
Now he tries to change him.
Violently. The new master attempts to aggressively scrub the slave with hot water and harsh soaps, trying to wash him white. The skin, of course, does not change, but the violent attempt to alter his fundamental nature nearly kills the poor man from the cold and the stress.
I really struggle with how deterministic this feels, to be honest.
I think a lot of modern readers do.
I mean, I understand the Venus and the cat metaphor when applied to something like modern corporate rebranding, right?
Yeah.
A company with a toxic, profit-at-all-costs culture can change its logo, update its mission statement, hire a shiny new PR firm.
They put on the human suit.
Exactly, the human suit. But the moment a mouse runs by, say, an opportunity to make a massive, unethical profit with very little chance of getting caught, they pounce. The core hasn't changed.
Right.
But when we apply this to individual human beings, it feels entirely at odds with the 21st century. I mean, the whole self-help industry, cognitive behavioral therapy, the actual science of neuroplasticity, they're all built on the proven idea that we can rewire our brains.
You're asking if the ancient wisdom is simply wrong here.
Yeah. Are these fables arguing that we are permanently stuck with our worst instincts?
We have to apply deep discernment here. I completely validate your pushback. We cannot adopt the fatalistic view that human beings are incapable of growth because, as you noted, modern neuroscience proves otherwise.
Right, we understand trauma and conditioning now.
Exactly. We know the brain can forge new neural pathways. However, the enduring wisdom of these texts, the part that still absolutely cuts through the noise today, is the warning against the illusion of superficial fixes.
The geographic or cosmetic cure.
Yes. The fables are attacking the belief that simply changing your circumstances will automatically change your character. Moving to a new city, getting a fancy new job title, or marrying someone in the hope that the commitment will magically erase their flaws.
Those are all just variations of putting a cat in a wedding dress.
Exactly. And the scrubbing in the Blackamoor fable represents the painful, futile effort we often exert trying to force ourselves or our romantic partners to be something fundamentally different through sheer external pressure.
So the distinction we really need to make is between structural change and cosmetic change. If you want to stop acting like a cat, the human suit just won't do the job.
No, it won't.
You actually have to do the grueling, microscopic internal work of reprogramming the instinct to pounce.
Precisely. And to understand the mechanics of why the human suit fails, we have to look at how the brain processes stress. The fables highlight this universal tension between our polished, idealized selves and our raw drive.
You're talking about the prefrontal cortex versus the amygdala, right?
Right. The prefrontal cortex handles logic, planning, social behavior. It's the human suit. But the instinctual drives are located deep in the amygdala. Maintaining that human suit requires immense cognitive and caloric energy.
So when everything is calm, it's easy to be on our best behavior.
Exactly. We act in alignment with our highest ideals. But the mouse represents a sudden trigger or stressor. When that trigger appears, the brain conserves energy by bypassing the slow, logical prefrontal cortex and routing control directly to the fast, instinctual amygdala.
Oh, wow. So under stress or temptation or deep exhaustion, we just default to our lowest level of training. We default to our core.
We do. And that concept that we default when the mouse appears is incredibly clarifying.
It really is, because it suggests that pretending our bad instincts don't exist is actually a form of self-sabotage. Which brings up Fable 111, the man and the satyr.
This is a brilliant example of that exact problem.
Right. So a satyr befriends a man, but he very quickly abandons the friendship in utter disgust. Why? Because he observes the man blowing on his hands to warm them in the cold, and then later blowing on his hot porridge to cool it down.
The satyr just cannot handle it.
He declares he cannot associate with a creature that blows hot and cold from the exact same breath.
Because the satyr represents pure, singular animal instinct, he cannot comprehend human contradiction.
He expects one input to yield one consistent output. But humans are walking contradictions, aren't we?
We hold opposing realities simultaneously all the time. We can be deeply compassionate one minute and profoundly selfish the next.
And if we operate like the satyrs, if we demand absolute, unbroken consistency from ourselves or from others, we're always going to be disappointed.
The satyr's retreat is a failure to tolerate the complexity of human nature. To manage our own duality, we have to abandon the expectation of perfection and instead build systems of management.
Okay, so practically, what does that look like for the listener?
Well, if you know you have an instinct to pounce when a certain trigger appears, the solution isn't to pretend you're magically above temptation. The solution is to identify the trigger.
You have to identify the mouse in your own life.
Exactly. What is the specific mouse that causes you to abandon your intellectual resolutions? Is it a particular tone of voice used by a family member that instantly reverts you to defensive teenage behavior?
Or is it the presence of a specific app on your phone when you're feeling anxious?
Yes. Once you map those triggers, you can actually manage your environment rather than relying on the sheer willpower of the human suit, which we know fails under stress.
That requires a level of self-honesty that is, frankly, deeply uncomfortable.
It's very confronting.
But once we do recognize our core nature and map those triggers, the next logical hurdle for you, the listener, is figuring out how to actually generate momentum.
Right.
I mean, if our instincts are constantly pulling us back to our baseline, how do we make tangible progress in life?
Well, the fables are brutal in their assessment of this. They entirely dismantle the mythology of rescue and address the tension between action and apathy.
Let's unpack Fable 105, Hercules and the Wagoner, because this one is iconic. A man is driving a heavy wagon down a muddy country lane, and the wheels sink deep into the mire. The horses strain, but the wagon is just stuck fast.
And what does the driver do?
He does nothing. He doesn't try to push. He doesn't dig at the mud. He simply stands by the side of the road, looks at the disaster, and screams to the god Hercules for salvation.
And in the fable, Hercules actually materializes.
He does, but he doesn't touch the wagon. He looks at the man and says, "Put your shoulder to the wheel, man, and goad on your horses, and then you may call on Hercules to assist you. If you won't lift a finger to help yourself, you can't expect Hercules or anyone else to come to your aid."
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a sweeping rejection of learned helplessness.
Tell me more about the cultural context there.
The authors of these fables lived in a highly mythological worldview. The gods, Hercules, Mercury, Venus, were believed to intervene in human affairs constantly.
So there was a massive temptation to just wait for them to fix everything.
Right, to attribute every failure to the will of the gods and to wait passively for divine intervention or the charity of neighbors. But the fables operate on this stark, unsentimental pragmatism. People who wait for the gods to harvest their fields will starve.
And we see the exact mechanics of that pragmatism in Fable 131, The Lark and the Farmer.
Oh, this one is a masterclass in intent.
It is. A mother lark has built her nest in a field of corn. One day, the farmer comes out, looks at the ripe corn, and says out loud that he must go to his neighbors and ask them to come help him reap the field.
The baby larks panic, right?
They panic, but the mother lark tells them not to worry at all. She explains that a man who delegates his survival to his friends is a man who will take his time.
Which is incredibly insightful.
Sure enough, several days pass. The corn actually starts to fall and rot. The farmer returns, sees the ruin, and declares that tomorrow he will hire the men and do the work himself.
And that changes everything.
Immediately. The mother lark tells her children it is time to fly away now. True danger or true progress only begins when someone stops outsourcing their responsibility and takes direct personal agency.
That delay tactic of delegation is something we see constantly in modern organizational structure.
Oh, everywhere. We form committees, we hire consultants, we wait for a consensus, all as a way to avoid the friction of actually taking action.
It's the modern equivalent of waiting for Hercules.
Right. I mean, I look at the wagoner screaming for a god, and I see someone relying entirely on passive complaints on social media or relying on thoughts and prayers without changing their routine.
It's the employee waiting for a savior CEO to arrive and magically fix the toxic company culture.
Yes. Or the entrepreneur waiting for the macroeconomic conditions to be absolutely perfect before launching a product. They want the aesthetic of desiring change without experiencing the friction of creating it.
Exactly.
So my question for you is, why do we do this? Why is sitting in the mud yelling for a god preferable to just pushing the wheel?
We choose the mud because it's psychologically safe. It acts as an armor for our ego.
Armor for the ego? How so?
Consider the alternative. If the wagoner puts his shoulder to the wheel, drives his feet into the mud, pushes with every ounce of physical strength he possesses, and the wagon still does not move, he is forced to confront his own profound inadequacy.
Oh, wow. He has to process the trauma of maximum effort yielding zero result.
Exactly. But as long as he stands on the sidelines and prays, his ego remains completely insulated. If the wagon stays stuck, it isn't his failure. It's Hercules' failure to answer the prayer.
Outsourcing our agency is a defense mechanism designed to protect us from the devastation of trying and failing. That is a staggering realization.
Taking full ownership is terrifying.
We maintain our own paralysis because the paralysis protects us from realizing our limits.
Yeah.
We choose guaranteed stagnation over the mere possibility of failure.
And to break that paralysis, the fables suggest a level of action that is almost shockingly aggressive.
You're thinking of Fable 104, the man in the image.
Yes, the smashing of the idol.
Right. A poor man possesses a wooden statue of a god. Every single day, he prays to it, offering polite, passive worship, begging for financial prosperity. And he remains totally destitute.
Nothing happens.
Nothing. Finally, his frustration boils over into absolute rage. He picks up the wooden idol and violently smashes it against the wall. The hollow head of the statue splits open, and a hidden stash of gold coins pours out onto the floor.
The mechanism here is undeniable. Polite, passive hope yielded absolutely nothing.
It was only the messy, aggressive, physical destruction of the idol that produced the wealth. Practical, messy action yields results that passive worship never could.
Smashing the idol is just the perfect metaphor for disrupting the sacred, comfortable routines that are slowly suffocating you.
We all have wooden images we pray to, right?
We do. Perhaps it's the belief that seniority alone will eventually secure a promotion. or the assumption that ignoring a conflict in a relationship will eventually make it fade away on its own.
Those are passive hopes.
The Fables argue that progress is rarely clean. Generating momentum requires you to disrupt your own ecosystem. It requires putting your shoulder into the filth of the mud or shattering the very icon you've been relying on.
So the practical question for you, the listener, is this. What is the wheel in your life right now that you are refusing to put your shoulder to? Identify one specific area where you are passively waiting to be rescued. Stop waiting for Hercules, step into the mud, and shatter the passivity.
That's powerful.
But there's a flip side to this, isn't there? Because the moment you put your shoulder to the wheel and the wagon actually moves, the moment you generate momentum, a completely new, far more insidious trap opens up.
Yes, it does.
When our actions yield results, our egos inevitably begin to inflate. We move from the problem of apathy to the danger of hubris.
The Fables map this transition brilliantly, because while they despise inaction, they are equally terrified of uncalibrated ambition. Once you have agency, the immediate psychological vulnerability becomes the trap of comparison.
Let's look at Fable 103, The Ox and the Frog, which perfectly captures this. The setup is simple. An ox steps into a pond and accidentally crushes a young frog. The surviving sibling runs to their mother and describes the horrific event, calling the creature that stepped on her brother a massive monster.
And how does the mother react?
Her immediate response isn't grief. It is a defensive reaction to her own perceived insignificance. She puffs herself up with air and asks, "Was he as big as this?"
She compares herself immediately.
Exactly. The little frog says the monster was much bigger. The mother inflates herself further. This big. No, mother, much bigger. Driven by this absolute refusal to accept that there is a creature in the world of a scale she cannot match, she continues to draw in air until her physiology fails and she literally bursts.
It is the ultimate tragedy of the comparative ego. The mother frog's identity was completely tied to being the largest entity in her specific tiny pond.
Right.
When she was confronted with the existence of the ox, her internal sense of safety was shattered. To reclaim that safety, she felt compelled to inflate her external scale to match the new benchmark.
The psychological terror of insignificance drives humans to do the exact same thing today.
Oh, constantly.
I mean, I equate the mother frog to someone going into massive credit card debt to project a wealthy lifestyle on Instagram. We see an ox, a colleague who buys a massive house, or an influencer living this hyper-curated, luxurious life, and we feel small.
And to offset that feeling, we artificially inflate our scale.
We finance cars we can't afford. We exaggerate our professional accomplishments on LinkedIn. We puff up. But human psychology, much like the frog's anatomy, cannot sustain the physics of an artificial scale.
No, the pressure eventually fractures our mental health or our financial stability. We burst.
It's just wild irony. But the mechanism driving that inflation is really a deep alienation from reality, which brings us to Fable 130, The Clown and the Countryman.
This one explores that alienation with incredible sophistication.
It really does. So a wealthy nobleman hosts a public entertainment spectacle. A famous clown takes the stage and announces a new trick. He hides his head and perfectly mimics the squeak of a pig. The crowd goes wild, applauding the performance.
They love the fake pig.
They love it. But a countryman in the audience is unimpressed. He announces he will do it better the next day. The following day, the theater is packed. The clown repeats his performance to great applause. Then the countryman steps up.
And he has a secret.
Unbeknownst to the audience, he has a real live baby pig hidden under his cloak. He pinches the pig, and the real pig squeals.
And the crowd's reaction is the twist.
The crowd immediately boos. They loudly declare that the clown's fake squeak was vastly superior and much more realistic. In response, the countryman pulls the real pig out, holds it up, and tells the crowd that their reaction proves exactly what kind of judges they are.
Human beings often prefer a comfortable lie, the clown's performance, to an uncomfortable truth, the actual pig.
I find this endlessly fascinating because it exposes how biased our expectations are.
Psychologically, this is the concept of cognitive ease and the power of schema. The audience had a very specific expectation, a schema, of what a pig squeak should sound like in a theatrical setting.
It needed to be polished and loud and dramatic.
Exactly. The actual pig, being real and unpolished, didn't match their mental model, creating cognitive friction. And rather than adjusting their model, they rejected reality.
We reject the real pig constantly. We prefer the heavily filtered, perfectly lit photograph of a hamburger in an advertisement over the slightly uneven real hamburger.
Or more dangerously. We prefer the idealized, cinematic version of romance over the deeply compromised, friction-heavy reality of a long-term relationship.
Wow. When our real lives don't squeak like the polished clown, we assume our lives are broken.
And when you combine that preference for artificial performance with the inflated ego of the mother frog, you create a beacon for predators.
Right. Because premature celebration makes you a target. Let's talk about Fable 147, the eagle and the cocks.
This one is a stark warning.
Two roosters engage in a brutal fight for dominance over farmyard. One rooster is defeated and retreats to hide in a dark, quiet corner of the barn. The victorious rooster, consumed by his own triumph, flies up to the highest point on the roof of the stables.
He has to announce his victory.
He puffs out his chest, flaps his wings, and crows at the top of his lungs, demanding that the world acknowledge his dominance. But his public broadcasting makes him highly visible.
Too visible.
An eagle, soaring high above, spots the exposed rooster, swoops down, and carries him off to be eaten. The defeated rooster then emerges from the shadows and safely assumes control of the farmyard.
The winner's absolute need for public validation was literally his death sentence.
It's a brilliant argument against our modern hustle culture and the constant need to publicly broadcast our victories. We live in an ecosystem that demands visibility. If you get a promotion, you are expected to write a multi-paragraph essay on LinkedIn. If you buy a house, you post a photo with the keys.
The victorious rooster thought he was only crowing for the other chickens. He forgot that the sky was full of eagles.
We forget about the data brokers, the scammers, the envious competitors, and the algorithms that feed on our visibility.
This theme that pride comes before a fall is one of the most universal pieces of wisdom found across global traditions. The fables are advocating for the profound power of quiet success, stealth wealth, not just in capital, but in happiness and stability.
So for the listener, the reflection here is, where are you puffing yourself up to match someone else's ox? And conversely, where are you rejecting a real pig, the truth, just because it doesn't match your artificial expectations?
It's a vital audit to perform on your life.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of these ideas. We're moving from the dangers of ego to our final thematic question. What constitutes a good life? And who should you surround yourself with to achieve it?
The fables approach this through an economic lens, really. They force us to calculate the hidden taxes of the environments we choose and the company we keep.
And the most iconic exploration of this calculus is Fable 144, the town mouse and the country mouse. I'd argue this is the ultimate story about defining success.
It's deeply embedded in our culture for a reason.
A town mouse visits his friend in the country and is served a meager meal of earthy roots and barley. Disgusted by the poverty, the town mouse convinces his friend to travel to the city, promising a larder overflowing with dates, honey, figs, and flour.
He promises the high life.
Right. The country mouse arrives and is astounded by the wealth. But the moment they begin to eat, the door opens, a human enters, and the mice must flee in sheer terror into a suffocatingly tight hole.
And it isn't just a one-time event.
No. This happens repeatedly. Dogs bark, servants enter, the threat of death is constant. Finally, the country mouse abandons the feast entirely. He states that the lap of luxury is negated by the surrounding dangers, and he prefers his simple roots eaten in peace.
This raises an important question about biological and emotional calculus. The country mouse is measuring the caloric density of the dates and honey against the physiological cost of chronic cortisol exposure.
The town mouse has normalized the terror, right? He views the constant spikes of adrenaline as the standard cost of doing business.
But the country mouse recognizes that the biological math simply doesn't work. The wealth is being extracted at the cost of his nervous system.
We see this exact equation play out in modern career trajectories. Someone accepts a high-visibility, high-stress corporate role that pays double. It's the horn of plenty. But it gives you chronic anxiety. You're working 80-hour weeks. The threat of termination is constant.
And the alternative is a lower-paying job that actually lets you sleep at night.
The fable forces us to ask, are the dates and honey worth the heart palpitations?
And that calculus extends beyond our careers into our interpersonal associations. The environments we choose are often defined by the people we allow into our proximity.
Let's talk about Fable 128, the two pots, because this is a staggering metaphor for the collateral damage of our relationships.
It's brilliant. Equals make the best friends.
A heavy flood sweeps two pots into a rushing river. One pot is made of heavy brass. The other is made of fragile earthenware clay. The brass pot calls out to the earthen pot, offering to stay close and protect it from the rocks.
A generous offer, seemingly.
Yes, but the earthen pot desperately replies, "Please stay away from me. That is exactly what I am afraid of. One bump from you, even a friendly one, and I will shatter into pieces."
One bump from you, even a friendly one, and I will shatter. It's an incredible articulation of physics applied to friendship.
The brass pot isn't malicious. It isn't acting like the lion or the cat. It genuinely wants to offer protection. But the sheer density of the brass pot poses an existential threat to the earthen pot.
Exactly. If you are fragile in a certain area, swimming next to a brass pot, a high-stress environment, a chaotic friend, a volatile market, it will eventually destroy you, even if they have good intentions.
If you are financially fragile and you attempt to navigate the river of life next to a brass pot friend who is massively wealthy and reckless with spending, their casual invitations to expensive dinners will shatter your budget.
Or if you're emotionally sensitive and align yourself with someone who thrives on high-drama conflict, the sheer turbulence of their daily life will shatter your peace. Their density is a threat to your fragility.
So navigating these boundaries and constantly auditing our environments requires a vast amount of emotional energy. To sustain that energy, we had to become ruthless about what we choose to care about.
Which brings us to Fable 102, the ass and the old peasant. This one often sparks debate because it sounds incredibly cynical on the surface.
It does. The setup is stark. An old peasant is watching his ass graze in a meadow. Suddenly, he spots an enemy army rapidly approaching. Panic-stricken, the peasant tells the ass they must run immediately, or they will both be captured.
And the ass is entirely unbothered.
He calmly looks up and asks, "If the enemy captures me, will they make me carry heavier loads than you make me carry now?" The peasant admits that a load is a load, and the weight will likely be exactly the same.
So the ass makes a logical decision.
He replies, "Then I don't mind if they take me. I won't be any worse off." And he just goes right back to eating the grass.
At a surface level, it sounds like an endorsement of extreme apathy. It suggests that if you occupy the bottom rung of a hierarchy, macro-level regime changes are irrelevant to you.
It's the equivalent of a frontline retail worker watching two billionaires wage a hostile takeover battle over the company they work for. Why should that worker experience chronic anxiety over the boardroom drama?
Regardless of whose name is on the corporate letterhead, that worker is still going to be stocking shelves for the same hourly wage.
Right. So I don't read this as cynicism. I read it as a deeply necessary emotional energy conservation. Why panic over systemic changes if your daily reality and responsibilities remain exactly the same? The peasant expects the ass to burn immense caloric energy to protect the property rights of the very man who already works him to the bone.
In our hyper-connected world where the 24-hour news cycle and algorithmic feeds demand our constant terrified attention, the ass asks the ultimate grounding question. Will this actually change the weight of the load I carry today?
The wisdom here is the rejection of manufactured panic.
But the biggest obstacle to adopting that mindset for the listener is FOMO, the fear of missing out, opting out of the panic, rejecting the horn of plenty, distancing yourself from the exciting brass pots. It feels like failing in today's hyper-competitive world.
But the truth extracted from these texts is that you aren't failing. You are actively opting out of an ecosystem designed to extract your energy until you break. You're choosing the economics of peace over the lethal cost of ambition. So the practical how-to here is what I call the earthenware audit. Look closely at the environments and people you are floating down the river with. Are they brass pots? Calculate the hidden emotional tax of the luxuries you're chasing.
As we draw all these threads together, the reality of power, the stubborn nature of our instincts, the necessity of messy action, the dangers of ego, we find these fables form a cohesive architecture of consequence.
A cohesive architecture. I love that.
And I want to leave you, the listener, to ponder a final, chilling synthesis of two fables we haven't heavily discussed yet.
Let's hear them.
In Fable 113, an eagle is shot out of the sky by a hunter. As the majestic bird is dying, he looks down at the arrow protruding from his chest and realizes, to his absolute horror, that the arrow is stabilized by his own feathers. His own dropped plumage guided the weapon that ended his life.
Wow. An arrow guided by its own feathers.
Yes. And in Fable 149, a farmer catches a fox that has been stealing his chickens. Consumed by a need for revenge, the farmer ties a bundle of highly flammable material to the fox's tail, sets it ablaze, and releases the animal.
That sounds like a terrible idea.
It is! The terrified burning fox immediately runs in a panic directly into the farmer's own fields of dry, unharvested wheat, burning the entire crop to ash.
The fire of revenge burning the farmer's own harvest.
The profound synthesis of these ancient texts is that our actions, our ego, and our malice are deeply, unavoidably intertwined with our own fate. Revenge and self-destruction are deeply intertwined.
When you operate out of blind revenge, or when you puff yourself up and leave pieces of your ego scattered in public, you are actively arming the forces that will hunt you.
Exactly. So the thought to ponder is this: what feathers are you unknowingly providing for the arrows that will eventually strike you?
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.